This story peeks under the itchy woolen blankets of medieval bedrooms, and it's not pretty. Between total lack of hygiene, uncomfortable clothing, rigid church rules, freezing houses, and superstitions about witches stealing your seed, medieval sex was often anything but romantic. The black humor weaves through real facts, like how not to go to hell guides that banned sex on certain days, including Wednesdays, belief that lust weakened men's bones, or the fact that doctors literally prescribed celibacy to treat headaches. There's also the awkward reality of shared rooms, beds full of lice, and creaky straw mattresses that squeaked louder than sin. Privacy? Non existent. Fun? Questionable. By the end of this sleepy, scandalous journey, you'll thank modern plumbing, contraceptives, and the invention of doors. Imagine stepping back in time, not to a romanticized medieval castle, but to a dimly lit, cramped cottage, the air thick with the smells of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and something vaguely musty. This is the reality of the medieval bedroom, far removed from the plush comfort and pristine cleanliness of our modern boudoir. Forget fluffy pillows and crisp linens. Picture instead a straw filled mattress, perhaps shared by several family members, its surface a teeming landscape of lice and fleas. The very notion of a private bedroom, a sanctuary for intimacy, was largely a foreign concept. For the vast majority of the medieval population, especially peasants, the bedroom was not a separate room at all, but simply a designated area within a larger shared space, a single room serving as kitchen, living room, and bedroom, all rolled into one. Families, often including multiple generations, slept together, huddled for warmth against the chill of drafty walls and chilly nights. The concept of personal space, as we understand it today, was utterly alien. Children slept alongside their parents, siblings shared beds, and even grandparents might occupy a corner of the room, their presence a constant reminder of the communal nature of life. This shared living arrangement had a profound impact on intimacy. The lack of privacy, the constant proximity of others, and the ever present awareness of watchful eyes created significant obstacles to any semblance of romantic seclusion. Imagine whispering sweet nothings under the watchful gaze of a snoring grandparent, or attempting a passionate embrace while your younger siblings slept soundly just inches away. The very act of undressing, a private ritual for us, became a public affair, a cumbersome process potentially observed by anyone within earshot. Hygiene, as we understand it, was a distant dream. Access to water was limited, and bathing was not a frequent occurrence. The concept of daily showers, or even weekly baths, was a luxury reserved for the wealthiest members of society. For most, a weekly or monthly communal bath, often in a trough or large tub shared by many, was the norm if they were fortunate enough to have access to one at all. These communal baths, far from being relaxing spa-like experiences, were likely crowded, noisy affairs, more likely to expose people to further contagions than provide cleanliness. The absence of regular bathing contributed significantly to the prevalence of body lice, fleas, and other vermin. These unwelcome guests were practically ubiquitous, infesting clothing, bedding, and the very fabric of daily life. Straw mattresses, while providing a degree of warmth and softness, were also ideal breeding grounds for insects. The constant itching, the relentless crawling sensation, the inevitable bites, these were simply accepted facts of life, not aberrations. They were an intrinsic part of the medieval experience, subtly, and often not so subtly, impacting all aspects of daily life, including intimacy. A romantic rendezvous could easily be interrupted by the incessant scratching of a lice infestation, transforming a tender moment into one of shared discomfort. The concept of clean bedding was also extremely fluid. The changing of sheets and blankets was not a regular occurrence, and the very notion of laundering bedding frequently was an unrealistic luxury for most families. Bedding tended to be replaced or repaired when it had become so worn, damaged, or infested that it was no longer usable. This constant presence of dust, dirt, and vermin significantly impacted the quality of sleep and, by extension, the energy levels and moods of those sharing the space. Consequently, the overall atmosphere within the medieval bedroom wasn't exactly conducive to romantic encounters. Beyond the physical challenges posed by a lack of hygiene and shared sleeping quarters, the emotional climate also played a significant role. The constant presence of family members, the lack of privacy, and the communal nature of daily life created an environment where intimacy was often fraught with tension and anxiety. Open displays of affection were discouraged in many families. Even seemingly private moments were punctuated by the awareness of others, their presence a constant undercurrent of daily life. Consider the stark contrast between this reality and our modern approach to hygiene and intimacy. We value privacy, we have access to abundant clean water, and we prioritize personal cleanliness. Our bedrooms are designed as sanctuaries, spaces for relaxation and intimacy, far removed from the bustle of daily life. The very idea of a shared bed with siblings or grandparents would be inconceivable to many in today's world. We benefit from frequent laundry, regular cleaning routines, and medical advancements that help us prevent and treat the kind of infestations that were commonplace in the Middle Ages. The medieval bedroom provides a compelling illustration of how dramatically our concepts of intimacy and personal space have evolved. It was a world of shared space, limited privacy, and constant physical discomfort, far removed from the romantic ideal often depicted in modern portrayals of the era. Yet, within this challenging environment, people still found ways to connect, to love, and to experience the full spectrum of human emotions. Understanding the unromantic realities of their daily life, the lack of hygiene, the shared sleeping quarters, the constant threat of disease, allows us to appreciate the resilience and adaptability of the human spirit. It also gives us a renewed appreciation for the conveniences of modern life and the privacy we take for granted. The contrast highlights the extraordinary differences between medieval and modern living, painting a vivid picture of a world both fascinating and far removed from our own. The challenges of the medieval bedroom serve as a reminder of the long journey we've taken to reach the standards of comfort and hygiene that shape our understanding of intimacy today. The simple act of closing a bedroom door, a gesture so commonplace, becomes something truly profound when viewed through the lens of medieval history, demonstrating a societal shift toward privacy and personal comfort that is fundamental to our contemporary understanding of intimacy and personal well being. The sheer volume of clothing worn by medieval individuals, regardless of social standing, presented a significant obstacle to spontaneous intimacy. Forget the effortless shedding of modern attire. The process of undressing in the Middle Ages was a laborious undertaking, a complex ritual often requiring considerable time and patience. Peasants, for instance, might wear several layers of coarse linen shirts and tunics, often patched and mended, each layer secured with buttons, laces, or ties. Over these would be heavier woolen garments designed to provide warmth against the harsh climate, further complicating the process of disrobing. These outer layers might include a kirtle or gown, perhaps a hooded cloak or mantle, especially during colder months. Removing each layer, one by one, in the dim light of a shared dwelling could be a lengthy and cumbersome affair. Imagine the scene: a couple attempting a clandestine moment of intimacy in the corner of a dimly lit room, surrounded by sleeping family members. The man, perhaps weary from a day's labor in the fields, fumbles with the laces of his tunic, his fingers clumsy in the low light. Each layer of clothing presents a new challenge, each knot or tie requiring careful manipulation. His wife, equally exhausted, struggles with her own layers of linen and wool. The rustling of fabric, the occasional snap of a broken thread. These sounds, barely audible in the stillness of the night, nonetheless risk disturbing the slumber of those around them. The very act of undressing becomes a test of patience and discretion. Spontaneity is a luxury they cannot afford. For women, the process was arguably even more complex. Their attire, often comprised of multiple layers of undergarments, kirtle, and an overgown, often included intricate fastenings and decorative elements. Corsets, though not as restrictive as later versions, might still constrict movement and require careful manipulation. The task of removing these multiple layers while maintaining modesty in a shared sleeping space was fraught with challenges. A single misplaced movement, a sudden rip in the fabric, could easily betray their secret and expose them to the judgment or curious gazes of family members. The construction of the clothing itself further compounded the issue. Medieval textiles were not the finely woven fabrics we encounter today. Coarse linen and heavy wool could be scratchy and uncomfortable against the skin, and the numerous seams and patches could chafe or irritate. Removing these garments, especially after a long day of physical labor, could be a painful experience. In the intimate setting of a shared bed, this discomfort only added to the inherent difficulties of achieving and maintaining a tender moment. The limited access to water and the relative infrequency of bathing, as we've previously discussed, further exacerbated the problem. Body odor, though perhaps less pungent than some might imagine due to differing diets, was certainly a factor, particularly in the warmer months. The layering of clothes meant that lingering smells might be trapped against the skin, intensifying the experience and contributing to a less than ideal ambiance for intimacy. The social constraints imposed by the communal nature of medieval life cannot be overlooked. Displays of public affection, even within the confines of one's own home, were not commonplace. The constant presence of family members, even during the night, created an atmosphere that discouraged open displays of affection or passion. The very idea of a private, secluded space dedicated to intimacy was largely unknown. The notion of a romantic rendezvous, as we understand it, would have seemed almost comical to many medieval people. This contrast with modern society is striking. Our lightweight, easily removable clothing, coupled with the widespread availability of clean water and the emphasis on personal hygiene, allows for a level of physical intimacy that was simply not possible in the Middle Ages. We are accustomed to shedding our clothes quickly and easily, often in private, a level of convenience that dramatically alters the nature of sexual encounters. The transition from medieval clothing to modern attire highlights a significant shift not only in fashion but also in attitudes towards intimacy and privacy. The impact of medieval clothing extended beyond the mere physical challenges of undressing. It also had significant implications for sexual expression. The very act of disrobing, normally a prelude to intimacy, became a significant chore in itself. What might be a spontaneous, sensual act in modern times became in the Middle Ages a laborious and potentially embarrassing undertaking. This inherently impacted sexual expression, possibly reducing spontaneity and limiting the exploration of diverse sexual practices. The time and the effort required to remove multiple layers of clothing likely altered the tempo and dynamics of sexual encounters, contributing to a culture of intimacy less focused on rapid arousal and more aligned with patient, deliberate approaches. The impact of clothing on medieval intimacy underscores a crucial element of social history often overlooked in romanticized portrayals of the era. It reveals the physical and social realities that shaped the sexual experiences of medieval people, highlighting the challenges and limitations imposed by their cultural and material circumstances. The stark contrast between the laborious undressing of the medieval era and the ease and privacy of modern times paints a vibrant picture of how profoundly our understanding of intimacy has evolved across centuries. We must remember that these historical realities shaped not only the mechanics of intimacy, but also the emotional landscape of relationships, fostering an appreciation for the complexities of human experience across time and cultures. Beyond the practical difficulties of undressing, the nature of medieval fabrics and their durability also contributed to shaping intimate experiences. The limited availability and high cost of fabrics meant that clothing was often repaired repeatedly rather than discarded. Patches and mending were common, often leaving garments somewhat rough against the skin. These repaired areas, along with potential stiffness from washing and drying methods, could have added a layer of texture to intimate encounters, potentially enhancing or detracting from the physical experience depending on the individual. The limited variety of fabrics and colors also meant less scope for experimenting with suggestive or sensual apparel, unlike the fashion driven pursuit of such items in modern times. The clothes served a purely functional purpose, designed for warmth, protection, and durability, rather than for any kind of sexual enhancement. The social class of individuals also played a significant role in the complexity of clothing and its impact on intimacy. While peasants might wear multiple layers of coarse linen and wool, members of the upper classes could afford finer textiles like silk and linen. Their clothing was often more elaborate and intricate, featuring finer weaves, embellishments, and more complex fastening systems. This meant even more layers, and even more time spent on the process of undressing. Although they might have more privacy than their peasant counterparts, the very act of disrobing still remained a process requiring considerable patience and dexterity. The concept of modesty also needs consideration. Medieval society, much like many societies across history, placed a premium on modesty and the avoidance of public displays of affection or sexuality. This societal pressure likely influenced the intimate experiences of individuals. The careful, deliberate undressing in a shared space, the attention given to covering oneself, even in private moments, and the overall lack of privacy all contributed to shaping a culture of intimacy that is very different from our own. Furthermore, the importance of clothing beyond mere protection from the elements underscores the significance of garments within medieval society. Clothing not only signified social status, but it also played a role in ritual and religious practices. The careful layering and careful removal of these layers could have also been influenced by religious beliefs and norms, further complicating the process of undressing and shaping intimate interactions. In conclusion, the seemingly mundane subject of medieval clothing offers a fascinating lens through which to examine the complexities of intimacy in a past era. The multiple layers, coarse fabrics, and laborious undressing process, combined with limited privacy and a strong emphasis on modesty, all played a significant role in shaping sexual behavior and romantic experiences. The physical and social challenges posed by medieval clothing remind us of the remarkable changes in our attitudes towards intimacy, privacy, and our bodies, emphasizing how vastly different the experience of intimacy was for medieval individuals compared to their modern counterparts. The physical barriers and social expectations created a world where intimacy was a far more deliberate and less spontaneous experience, a stark contrast to our modern conceptions of romance and sexuality. The heavy woolen cloak of the church, woven with threads of divine law and fear of eternal damnation, hung heavily over the medieval bedroom, while the physical challenges of undressing, as we've explored, formed a significant barrier to spontaneous intimacy. The church's pronouncements on sex erected even more formidable obstacles, shaping sexual behavior in ways far removed from our modern understanding of love and desire. Think of it as a rather inconvenient and eternally judging chaperone. Medieval individuals lived under a pervasive moral code dictated largely by the Catholic Church. The Church didn't simply offer guidance on appropriate sexual conduct. It dictated a comprehensive system of rules designed not just to regulate behavior, but to define what constituted a virtuous, God-fearing life, free from the fires of hell. These weren't simply suggestions. They were prescriptions backed by the weight of divine authority and the very real threat of eternal damnation. One can almost imagine the circulation of hand-copied pamphlets, perhaps titled something like How Not to Go to Hell, a handy guide to acceptable sexual behavior and when to avoid it entirely. Such a guide, though undoubtedly less sensationalistic, might have detailed the numerous forbidden acts, premarital sex, adultery, sodomy, a term encompassing a wide range of non-procreative sexual acts, bestiality, and masturbation. The list, depending on the strictness of the local interpretation of religious doctrine, could extend into surprising realms. These weren't mere sins, they were crimes against God, carrying with them both earthly and spiritual consequences. The church didn't just forbid certain acts, it regulated the timing of permissible activity with a surprising level of specificity. Certain days of the week were considered particularly unsuitable for conjugal relations. Wednesday, for instance, frequently found itself on the forbidden list, perhaps linked to the tradition of Wednesday as the day of the crucifixion. Lent, Advent, and other holy periods imposed even stricter sexual fasts, emphasizing self denial and spiritual preparation. Pregnancy, childbirth, and menstruation imposed further constraints on sexual activity, reflecting a combination of religious beliefs and practical considerations concerning hygiene and health. It's easy to picture the conflicted state of a medieval couple, weighing the yearning for physical intimacy against the looming threat of divine retribution. The very act of lovemaking could be a tense affair, a gamble with eternal fate. The whispers of confession, where these intimate details were laid bare to a priest, added another layer of complexity, turning a private act into a potentially public one, subject to penance and the judgment of the religious authority. The church's power wasn't limited to the moral compass, it extended to the very fabric of daily life. Its influence seeped into every aspect of society, from the laws of the land to the most intimate aspects of personal life. Penalties for violating the church's sexual morality varied widely depending on the severity of the offense, the social standing of the offender, and the whims of local authorities. They ranged from minor penances, such as fasting or saying prayers, to far more severe punishments, including excommunication, fines, and even imprisonment. Excommunication, the severing of one's ties with the church, was a particularly potent threat in a deeply religious society. It carried social and economic consequences as well as spiritual ones. Those excommunicated were often ostracized by their communities, cut off from social support, and excluded from many essential aspects of daily life. The fear of such social isolation, coupled with the fear of eternal damnation, created a powerful mechanism for social control. However, the church's influence wasn't uniformly enforced. While the ideal of strict adherence to religious doctrines was widely promoted, the reality was often far more nuanced. Rural communities, often geographically isolated and less directly under the supervision of the church, might exhibit greater leniency in their interpretation of sexual morality. The lives of peasants, already burdened by hard labor and poverty, were often less strictly regulated, as the church prioritized other aspects of moral instruction. The gap between official doctrine and actual practice created a rich tapestry of human experience. While religious authorities preached abstinence and chastity, the fundamental biological drives of humanity ensured that sexual activity continued, albeit within the ever-present shadow of religious scrutiny. The desire for intimacy existed alongside the fear of divine punishment, creating a constant tension and driving subterfuge and secrecy. The humorous aspect of this religious regulation arises from the sheer human ingenuity displayed in navigating these strict rules. Imagine whispered conversations in dimly lit corners, clandestine rendezvous shielded by the shadows of night, and the ever-present anxiety of being discovered. The conflict between religious doctrine and human desires created a dynamic, a tension that played out in countless ways, shaping not only sexual behavior, but also the very structure of medieval society. The Church, while a powerful force in shaping medieval sexual morality, wasn't the only factor at play. Social class, local customs, and personal beliefs all intertwined to create a complex tapestry of sexual behavior. Peasants, bound by the constraints of survival and often living in close knit communities, might have had different experiences and interpretations of religious rules compared to the nobility, who enjoyed greater privacy and less direct supervision from the church. The contradictions and complexities of medieval sexual morality remain a fascinating topic of study. The contrast between the rigid pronouncements of the church and the realities of human experience provides a unique window into the human condition. It reminds us that even under the weight of powerful religious institutions, human desires persist, finding ways to express themselves despite the risks and consequences. The medieval era provides a stark illustration of how human behavior can be shaped by a combination of religious dogma, social norms, and the enduring power of the human spirit. It wasn't just about how not to go to hell, it was about navigating the complexities of life, love, and lust under a watchful and often judgmental eye. The medieval bedroom, far from being a purely private space, was a stage where the drama of human desire played out against a backdrop of religious dogma and social constraints, a performance with high stakes and uncertain outcomes. The laughter and the tears, the passion and the fear, all were part of this intricate and often contradictory tapestry of medieval life. The heavy hand of the church, as we've seen, governed much of medieval sexual behavior, but alongside its pronouncements lay a vibrant tapestry of folk beliefs and superstitions, shaping anxieties and practices surrounding sex and reproduction in ways far removed from religious doctrine. Scientific understanding of the human body was rudimentary, leaving a void filled by a rich, often contradictory blend of magical thinking, herbal remedies, and deeply ingrained superstitions. These beliefs weren't simply quaint eccentricities. They profoundly influenced sexual behavior, marriage practices, and attitudes towards pregnancy and childbirth. One prevalent belief held that excessive lust weakened bones. This wasn't a purely metaphorical idea. It reflected a real fear of physical debilitation, perhaps stemming from a lack of understanding of the human body's complexities. The depletion of vital energy through sexual activity was believed to literally drain the strength from one's bones, making individuals more susceptible to illness and injury. This belief might explain the prevalence of fasting and abstinence, not merely as religiously mandated practices, but also as a way to safeguard one's physical well-being. Imagine a medieval man, perhaps a blacksmith, whose strength was essential to his livelihood, consciously limiting his sexual activity to avoid compromising his physical capabilities. The fear wasn't merely of divine retribution, it was a tangible fear of physical frailty. The anxieties surrounding fertility were equally profound. In a society largely dependent on agricultural labor, children represented both future workforce and continuity of lineage. Infertility, therefore, was a deeply feared condition, prompting a wide array of folk remedies and superstitious practices. These remedies, passed down through generations, ranged from consuming specific herbs and potions, many of which were likely ineffective but held strong cultural significance, to engaging in ritualistic practices aimed at appeasing supernatural forces. The belief in the power of charms, amulets, and sympathetic magic, the idea that performing an action on an object could influence a corresponding event, was widespread, and these beliefs found fertile ground in the realm of reproduction. For example, specific herbs, like vervain, were widely believed to possess fertility enhancing properties. Their use wasn't simply a matter of ingestion. The ritual surrounding their preparation and consumption held immense symbolic weight. Women might wear amulets crafted from specific materials believed to boost fertility, invoking the power of protective spirits or deities associated with childbirth. Such practices weren't merely attempts at medical intervention, they were rituals that offered solace and hope in the face of uncertainty. They were attempts to exert some control over a process that often felt entirely beyond human comprehension. The role of the moon in influencing fertility was another common belief. The cyclical nature of the lunar phases mirrored in many minds the cyclical nature of female physiology. Certain moon phases were considered particularly auspicious for conception, while others were deemed unfavorable. This belief intersected with the prevailing cosmological understanding of the time, connecting human fertility to broader cosmic rhythms and influences. One can imagine women carefully charting the lunar phases, coordinating their intimate lives with the celestial clockwork. This was not merely a matter of superstition, it was a deeply ingrained cultural practice. Childbirth itself was shrouded in an almost overwhelming aura of superstition and anxiety. The inherent dangers of childbirth in the pre-modern era led to a plethora of beliefs aimed at ensuring a safe delivery. These beliefs often centered on warding off evil spirits or supernatural forces believed to interfere with the birthing process. A pregnant woman might wear special charms or amulets, employ various protective rituals, or seek the counsel of midwives or healers who were often deeply involved in the magical and spiritual aspects of childbirth. The line between medicine and magic was often blurred, with folk remedies and superstitious practices intertwined in an attempt to manage the risks. Midwives, often the only point of medical contact for women in childbirth, held a unique position in society. They played a crucial role, not only in assisting with the physical act of childbirth, but also in navigating the complex web of superstitions and beliefs surrounding it. Their knowledge, though not rooted in modern scientific understanding, was nonetheless vital in providing reassurance and spiritual guidance during this vulnerable period. They may have used herbs and potions alongside prayers and rituals, blending practical techniques with spiritual interventions in an attempt to ensure a safe outcome. They acted as both medical practitioners and spiritual guides, reflecting the integral link between the physical and spiritual in the medieval world. The lack of scientific understanding of conception and pregnancy resulted in a range of beliefs surrounding the causes of infertility or abnormalities in the unborn child. These beliefs often attributed such problems to supernatural causes or to transgressions against religious or social norms. A miscarriage might be seen as a divine punishment, a reflection of a woman's sinful behavior, or a sign of imbalance in the cosmic order. This perspective placed enormous psychological pressure on pregnant women, creating a climate of intense anxiety and fear. The responsibility for a healthy pregnancy and childbearing rested heavily on the woman's shoulders, and failure could be interpreted as a personal failing or even as a curse. The superstitious beliefs surrounding sex and reproduction in the Middle Ages illuminate a society grappling with the mysteries of the human body and the inherent uncertainties of life and death. The intertwining of religious doctrine, folk beliefs, and medical practices created a complex tapestry of anxieties, hopes, and rituals that shaped sexual behavior and attitudes towards procreation. These weren't just idle superstitions, they were deeply held beliefs that profoundly influenced the lives of medieval people, shaping their daily actions and reflecting a worldview starkly different from our own. The gap between scientific knowledge and deeply held beliefs offers a window into the complex interplay of faith, fear, and the human desire to understand and control the mysteries of life. The legacy of these beliefs, however, extends far beyond the medieval period. Many superstitions and remedies persist in various forms, highlighting the resilience of cultural traditions and the enduring power of folk beliefs. Even today, echoes of these medieval anxieties can be found in some modern practices and attitudes towards pregnancy and childbirth, demonstrating a fascinating continuity between past and present in human understanding or misunderstanding of the human body and the miracle of procreation. The medieval world, with its blend of religious dogma and superstitious beliefs, offers a compelling case study in how fear and uncertainty shape human behavior, even in the most intimate aspects of life. The mysteries of conception, gestation, and childbirth fueled a rich and complex tapestry of rituals, remedies, and superstitions, demonstrating the enduring power of belief in a world often shrouded in ignorance. The air hung thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, damp wool, and wood smoke, the familiar aroma of a medieval household. Evenings brought a welcome respite from the day's labors, but little in the way of privacy. The concept of a bedroom, as we understand it, was largely absent from the lives of most medieval people. Sleeping quarters were shared, often by entire families, crammed into single rooms, with little more than a straw pallet separating one sleeper from another. The notion of intimate moments, stolen amidst the rustling straw and the snoring of siblings, stands in stark contrast to the romanticized image of medieval romance, often presented in popular culture. Imagine, if you will, a young couple, newly wed, attempting to navigate the complexities of their physical relationship within the confines of a shared room. Their bed, a simple framework of wood piled high with straw, offered little in the way of comfort, let alone privacy. The straw, constantly shifting and rustling, announced every movement, transforming even the most delicate caress into a noisy affair. Every creak of the wooden frame, every sigh or moan, was audible to anyone within earshot. The thin fabric that might have served as a sheet provided scant protection from the cold or the prying eyes and ears of those sharing the cramped space. Privacy, a commodity we take for granted, was a luxury beyond the reach of the average medieval couple. The constant presence of family members, parents, siblings, perhaps even grandparents, created an environment where intimacy was a precarious dance, requiring careful timing and hushed whispers. The very act of lovemaking, a deeply personal and vulnerable experience, was transformed into a hushed performance, a carefully choreographed act played out under the ever present gaze of family. Children, often sharing the same sleeping quarters, provided an additional layer of complexity. Their presence, while not always intentional, was a significant factor affecting the timing and frequency of intimate encounters. The absence of the light of day necessitated discretion. Intimacy was thus reduced to fleeting moments under the cover of darkness, hurried encounters snatched between the hours of sleep and the rising sun. The romantic ideal of passion and intimacy was overshadowed by the practical realities of shared living spaces. Lovemaking became a delicate balance of desire and discretion, a challenge in itself. Furthermore, the lack of private space extended beyond the bedroom. The medieval home was not divided into separate rooms dedicated to specific functions as they are today. The kitchen, dining area, and sleeping quarters often occupied the same space. Activities that we today perform in the privacy of our own rooms, such as bathing or changing clothes, were conducted openly within the shared living space. This open and communal nature of living undoubtedly influenced social interactions, including sexual behavior. The very concept of courtship and intimacy needed to adapt to these communal surroundings. Public displays of affection were infrequent, although not completely absent. However, the nature of intimacy itself would have been greatly shaped by the lack of private space. The emotional weight of the act of lovemaking in the medieval world may have been amplified. When every physical act carries the potential to be overheard or witnessed, the intimacy becomes more potent as it's shared more implicitly. The unspoken understanding between lovers, a subtle glance across the room, or a barely perceptible touch, became an essential component of the relationship in this highly communal setting. The psychological impact of these limited private spaces should not be overlooked. A lack of privacy is a source of stress for even modern individuals. The constant presence of family members in such close quarters could lead to anxieties, especially for those desiring intimacy. It could potentially cause emotional distance and could impact the couple's overall well-being. This lack of personal space and the consequent restrictions on intimacy could have contributed to a more restrained and cautious approach to physical expression than is often depicted in popular imagination. The physical limitations of the shared living arrangement also affected other aspects of sexual behavior. Contraception, while known to some extent, though often unreliable, was likely limited by the lack of privacy required for its use. The social stigma associated with sexual activity outside marriage, heavily reinforced by the Church's teachings, added another layer of complexity. The very act of lovemaking became a precarious balancing act between physical desire and the social and religious constraints imposed by society. The conditions in which medieval people lived and loved often contrasted sharply with modern ideas of romance. Instead of grand romantic gestures and secluded settings, the daily reality was one of shared spaces, constant awareness of others, and the pervasive influence of social norms and religious doctrines. The physical challenges of living in close quarters, alongside the social and religious expectations, profoundly shaped the experience of intimacy for medieval couples. The limited means of regulating family size, combined with the high infant mortality rates, meant that pregnancies were common and births were frequent events within the shared household. The very act of childbirth, a vulnerable and physically demanding experience, took place in the shared space, adding to the overall lack of privacy. The constant presence of family members during childbirth would have provided support in some ways, but would have also heightened the vulnerability and exposed the woman to an audience during one of her most physically and emotionally vulnerable moments. It is crucial to remember that the shared sleeping arrangements were not universally the same across all of medieval Europe. The specifics varied according to social class, regional customs, and the size and structure of the dwelling. Wealthier families might have had more spacious homes that afforded slightly more privacy, but even these would have been far removed from the private, enclosed spaces we are accustomed to. In most cases, the norm was communal sleeping spaces where privacy was a scarce commodity. This communal nature of medieval life profoundly influenced the expression of love and intimacy. The constraints of shared sleeping spaces encouraged a subtlety and a tacit understanding between partners, transforming intimacy into a quiet act of shared understanding and connection within a busy and noisy household. The physical challenges, social pressures, and religious expectations shaped the ways medieval people experienced sex and love, creating a reality far removed from the often idealized portrayals. The truth of medieval intimacy was a tale woven with the rustling of straw, the creaks of wooden frames, and the ever present hum of family life, a story of both resilience and adaptation. Their experience reminds us that intimacy is not always a matter of secluded spaces, but often a question of finding connection and understanding amidst the complexities of shared lives. The intimate lives of medieval people offer a fascinating glimpse into a world where the lines between public and private were far more blurred than they are today. The resulting dynamic profoundly shaped both the practicalities and emotional textures of intimate relationships, leaving a lasting legacy on our understanding of love, sex, and intimacy. The shared living arrangements described earlier, while impacting intimacy, also played a significant role in the spread of sexually transmitted infections, STIs. The lack of personal hygiene, coupled with close proximity to others, created an environment ripe for the transmission of disease. Unlike today, where medical understanding allows for prevention and treatment, medieval people lacked the knowledge to effectively combat these infections. Their understanding of disease was rooted in humoral theory, attributing illness to an imbalance of the body's four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. STIs, therefore, were not understood as distinct infections caused by specific microorganisms, but rather as manifestations of this humoral imbalance, often linked to moral failings or divine punishment. This lack of understanding significantly hampered efforts to prevent and treat STIs. The symptoms, was often presenting as sores, rashes, or discharge, might be attributed to a variety of causes, leading to misdiagnosis and ineffective treatment. The perceived connection between STIs and moral transgressions further complicated matters. Those afflicted were often stigmatized, their suffering compounded by shame and social ostracization. The church, with its strong emphasis on sexual morality, often reinforced these stigmas, further marginalizing those affected. Confessions, meant to offer spiritual solace, could become instruments of judgment, exacerbating the sense of guilt and isolation. The available treatments often reflected the prevailing medical understanding. Herbal remedies, bloodletting, and purgatives were commonly employed, with varying degrees of effectiveness. Mercury, despite its toxicity, was used in some treatments, often with detrimental effects on the patient's overall health. The application of poultices, salves, and ointments, while sometimes offering temporary relief from symptoms, did little to address the underlying cause of the infection. The lack of effective antibiotics meant that many STIs ran their course, leaving individuals with chronic complications or long term health issues. Syphilis, for example, could lead to severe disfigurement, neurological damage, and even death. Gonorrhea, with its potential for infertility and pelvic inflammatory disease, posed a significant threat to women's health. The social consequences of STIs extended beyond the individual. The spread of infection within families and communities was a constant threat. Shared sleeping arrangements facilitated the transmission of disease, particularly among children who were highly vulnerable to infection. The lack of effective sanitation practices further exacerbated the problem. Sewage disposal was rudimentary at best, and the lack of clean water made hygiene a significant challenge. The crowded conditions in urban centers, where multiple families often shared cramped living quarters, increased the risk of infection significantly. The high mortality rates of the time, coupled with the chronic nature of many STIs, had a profound impact on medieval society. The loss of productive members of the community due to illness and disability strained resources and impacted economic stability. The fear of contracting STIs also influenced social behavior, potentially leading to a decrease in sexual activity or a preference for less risky sexual practices. While the exact extent of the impact remains a subject of ongoing historical research, the pervasive presence of STIs undeniably shaped the social landscape of the Middle Ages. It's important to note that the severity of STIs and their societal impact varied across medieval Europe. Differences in climate, diet, hygiene practices, and living conditions all played a role in the prevalence and severity of disease. Urban centers, with their high population densities and poor sanitation, faced higher infection rates compared to rural areas. The social hierarchies of the time also influenced the experience of STIs. Wealthier individuals, with access to better resources and health care, however rudimentary, might have fared slightly better than those from lower social classes. However, even those with greater resources lacked the medical knowledge to effectively treat these diseases. The scarcity of reliable medical records complicates our understanding of the true prevalence of STIs in the medieval period. Many illnesses were likely undocumented or misdiagnosed. Accounts of STIs often appear in literary sources, religious texts, or legal records, offering glimpses into their impact, but not providing a comprehensive epidemiological picture. These sources, while valuable, often reflect societal attitudes and biases rather than strictly clinical data. Archaeological evidence, such as skeletal remains showing signs of syphilis, offers another perspective, but is limited in its ability to provide a complete picture. Despite these challenges, historical research sheds light on the significant burden of STIs in medieval Europe. These infections were not merely medical conditions, they were social phenomena, inextricably linked to the cultural, religious, and economic realities of the time. The experience of STIs highlights the vulnerabilities and challenges faced by medieval people, while also offering a stark reminder of the significant advances made in medicine and public health since then. The lack of understanding about the causes and transmission of these infections meant that treatments were often ineffective, and the stigma surrounding STIs led to social isolation and suffering for many. Understanding this history is not only essential to appreciating the medical and social realities of the past, but also to gaining a deeper appreciation for the advancements in medical science and public health that have improved human lives significantly. Furthermore, considering the limited understanding of human anatomy and physiology during the medieval period, the interpretation of symptoms related to STIs was often influenced by religious and cultural beliefs. The humoral theory, as mentioned previously, provided a framework for understanding the body and its functions, but it often fell short in explaining the complexities of infectious diseases. The attribution of illness to divine punishment, imbalances in the body's humors, or even witchcraft significantly hampered efforts towards effective diagnosis and treatment. This reliance on supernatural explanations diverted attention from the practical measures that could have mitigated the spread of infections. The lack of accurate diagnostic tools further limited the ability to identify and treat STIs effectively. The absence of microscopic examination meant that the causative agents of these diseases remained unknown, making it impossible to develop targeted treatments. The diagnostic process often relied on the observation of outward symptoms, which could be ambiguous and lead to misdiagnosis. This ambiguity further fueled the stigma and social isolation experienced by those affected, as they were often blamed for their own illness. Beyond the lack of scientific understanding, the religious and moral context of the medieval period added another layer of complexity to the management of STIs. The Church's strong emphasis on sexual morality meant that those afflicted with STIs often faced social condemnation and exclusion, hindering their ability to seek help and support. The fear of shame and social repercussions often prevented individuals from disclosing their symptoms, leading to further spread of the infections. The impact of STIs extended beyond the immediate suffering of the afflicted individuals. The economic consequences were significant, as illness often led to lost productivity and increased healthcare costs, even if the treatments were largely ineffective. The impact on families was profound, as the loss of a breadwinner or the chronic illness of a family member could lead to financial hardship and social disruption. These infections therefore affected not just the health, but also the social and economic well-being of entire communities. The narrative surrounding STIs in the Middle Ages offers a compelling case study in the interplay between societal norms, religious beliefs, and medical understanding. The lack of scientific knowledge, coupled with strong moral and religious convictions, resulted in ineffective treatments and increased stigma. The limited understanding of disease mechanisms prevented the development of preventative measures, leading to the widespread suffering that characterized this period. By examining this historical context, we gain a richer understanding of the challenges faced by medieval people and the significant progress made in medicine and public health since that time. The story of STIs in the Middle Ages serves as a reminder of the importance of scientific knowledge, public health initiatives, and compassionate approaches to disease management. It also highlights the enduring impact of social stigma and the need for empathy and understanding in addressing health crises. The medieval experience reveals the profound interconnectedness between health, society, and belief systems, shaping our understanding of how medical history can profoundly influence our perspectives on health issues even in the modern era. The pervasive shadow of disease and death cast long across all aspects of medieval life, but perhaps nowhere more darkly than upon the experience of childbirth. While the previous discussion centered on the challenges posed by sexually transmitted infections, the perils of bringing new life into the world presented a distinct and equally formidable threat. The medieval period, for all its romanticized portrayals in popular culture, was a brutal time for women, particularly during pregnancy and childbirth. The mortality rates were staggering, a chilling testament to the limitations of medical knowledge and the harsh realities of the era. For both mother and child, the birthing process represented a perilous journey, fraught with unforeseen dangers and an agonizing lack of effective intervention. The lack of understanding regarding the physiological processes of pregnancy and childbirth was profoundly impactful. Medieval medical texts, often reliant on ancient Greek and Roman theories, contained limited accurate anatomical knowledge. The humoral theory, while attempting to explain bodily functions, failed miserably in providing insight into the complexities of labor and delivery. Consequently, medical interventions were largely ineffective, frequently based on superstition and religious beliefs rather than scientific understanding. Women were often left to the care of midwives, women with limited formal training and whose practices varied widely, depending on local traditions and beliefs. While midwives possessed valuable empirical knowledge passed down through generations, their resources were limited, and their ability to handle complications was extremely restricted. Imagine, if you will, a woman in the throes of labor, surrounded not by the sterile environment of a modern birthing room, but by the rough-hewn interior of a medieval dwelling. The air, thick with smoke from the hearth fire and the smells of unwashed bodies, is far from sterile. The tools available to the midwife are rudimentary at best, perhaps some herbs, cloths, and perhaps a crude instrument for assisting with delivery if complications arose. The concept of asepsis, the prevention of infection, is entirely unknown. Infection, in fact, was a major cause of death both for mothers and their newborns. A simple cut during delivery could become a life-threatening wound in the unsanitary conditions of the time. The sheer physical toll of childbirth itself was immense. Women often endured prolonged and difficult labors, lacking the pain management techniques available today. The high rate of infant mortality further added to the emotional burden. Stillbirths, infant deaths shortly after birth, and the widespread prevalence of neonatal infections were common occurrences. A mother might survive childbirth only to witness the death of her newborn, leaving her to cope with grief and the physical trauma of delivery in a culture that offered little solace. The high mortality rate of childbirth is reflected in the art and literature of the period, often depicting the fragility of life and the constant threat of death in stark terms. The psychological impact of childbirth in the Middle Ages should also not be overlooked. Women lived with the constant threat of death, not only during labor, but also throughout pregnancy. The lack of access to medical care meant that complications such as eclampsia, a severe condition involving seizures, or postpartum hemorrhage, presented insurmountable obstacles. The experience of childbirth was not only physically arduous, but also mentally taxing, fueled by anxiety, fear, and the pervasive superstition surrounding pregnancy and birth. Many medieval beliefs linked childbirth to the supernatural, associating it with demonic influences or curses. This only served to increase the anxieties of pregnant women and the burden on the midwives who cared for them. The contrast between medieval childbirth and modern medical practices is stark and illuminating. Modern medicine offers a range of interventions, from prenatal care to pain management techniques to advanced surgical procedures, dramatically improving the safety and well being of mothers and their babies. Ultrasound scans allow for early detection of potential complications. Cesarean sections offer a vital life saving procedure in emergencies, and antibiotics have revolutionized the treatment of infections. The advancements in hygiene and sanitation practices have also drastically reduced infection rates. The difference is a world apart. The medieval scenario of helplessness and high mortality rates stands in stark contrast to the comparatively safe and technologically advanced environment of modern birthing practices. Beyond the immediate physical and psychological risks, the social consequences of childbirth in the Middle Ages were significant. The loss of a mother often had devastating repercussions on the family, leaving children orphaned and potentially vulnerable to poverty or exploitation. If the mother survived but was left weakened or chronically ill after childbirth, the family's economic security could be severely jeopardized. The absence of social safety nets or governmental support systems meant that communities had to rely primarily on their own limited resources. Women's lives were profoundly impacted by their reproductive experiences. The challenges of pregnancy and childbirth shaped their social roles and their overall well being. Moreover, the societal views on women during this period significantly influenced their experience of childbirth. The patriarchal nature of medieval society placed women in a subordinate position, further marginalizing them during what was already a vulnerable time. Many social norms and expectations placed a heavy emphasis on women's reproductive roles, often neglecting their overall health and well being. Their limited access to education and opportunities outside the domestic sphere restricted women's ability to make informed decisions about their reproductive health. The scarcity of detailed historical records regarding childbirth experiences in the Middle Ages further complicates our understanding of this critical aspect of medieval life. While some glimpses into the daily struggles and triumphs of women are found in personal diaries or religious texts, comprehensive data is often lacking. Archaeological evidence, such as skeletal remains, can provide limited insight into the health of medieval women, but offers little direct information about their childbirth experiences. In conclusion, childbirth in the Middle Ages was an exceptionally hazardous undertaking, marked by high mortality rates and profound lack of effective medical interventions. The absence of scientific understanding, coupled with unsanitary conditions and prevalent superstitions, created an environment of significant risk. Understanding the experiences of medieval women and the challenges they faced provides a crucial perspective, not only to appreciate the progress made in modern medicine, but also to gain a deeper insight into the social, economic, and psychological factors that shaped their lives. The sharp contrast between then and now underscores the extraordinary advancements achieved in women's health care and the value of continued advancements in medical technology and social support systems. The medieval experience serves as a powerful reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of continued efforts to improve the safety and well being of mothers and their newborns globally. The omnipresent specter of death, so vividly illustrated in the previous section's exploration of childbirth, permeated every facet of medieval life, profoundly shaping not only people's understanding of mortality, but also their attitudes towards sexuality. The medieval world was a landscape dotted with reminders of its own transience. The crumbling stones of ancient ruins, the ubiquitous graveyards surrounding villages and towns, and the constant awareness of disease and famine. This pervasive sense of mortality fundamentally altered the way individuals perceived life, love, and the body itself. Religion, particularly the dominant Catholic Church, played a central role in shaping these perceptions. The Church's teachings on sin, salvation, and the afterlife provided a powerful framework through which individuals interpreted their experiences, including their sexual lives. The concept of the body as a vessel of the soul, vulnerable to both earthly and spiritual corruption, profoundly influenced medieval sexual ethics. Sexual acts outside the confines of marriage were viewed as sinful not only because they violated God's commandments, but also because they potentially jeopardized the soul's salvation. The Church's emphasis on chastity and continence, particularly for the clergy and religious orders, fostered a complex tension between the spiritual ideal and the human reality. While celibacy was considered a high calling, reflecting a dedication to God and a renunciation of earthly desires, the reality of human sexuality often clashed with these ideals. Historians have uncovered evidence suggesting that the practice of celibacy was frequently challenged, with clandestine sexual relationships and the fathering of children occurring even within monasteries and convents. This discrepancy between the Church's pronouncements and the lived experiences of individuals highlights the inherent complexities of medieval sexual morality. Furthermore, the Church's doctrine regarding marriage and procreation significantly impacted sexual attitudes. Marriage was not solely a union based on love or mutual affection, but primarily a social and religious institution intended for procreation and the continuation of the family lineage. Sexual activity was therefore largely confined to the marital bed, and its primary purpose was seen as fulfilling God's command to be fruitful and multiply. Any sexual act that did not serve this purpose was considered immoral and potentially damnable. This perspective significantly limited the scope of acceptable sexual expression, leaving little room for personal desires or exploration outside the strictly defined boundaries of marriage and procreation. Death's constant presence, however, also fostered a certain carpe diem mentality among some medieval individuals. The awareness that life could be cut short at any moment, either by disease, accident, or violence, led some to embrace pleasure and sensory experiences more intensely. While the Church strongly condemned excessive indulgence, this sense of mortality could, paradoxically, serve to intensify sexual desires and a more unrestrained approach to physical intimacy. This is reflected in some medieval art and literature, where images of sensual love and fleeting pleasures stand in stark contrast to the prevailing religious morality. However, the relationship between death and sexuality was not uniformly straightforward. The fear of death and eternal damnation could conversely induce feelings of guilt and anxiety surrounding sexual expression. The concept of the Last Judgment, with its depiction of individuals being judged for their actions in life, exerted a considerable psychological influence on medieval individuals. The prospect of facing divine retribution for sexual transgressions instilled a deep sense of caution and restraint in many. The impact of death on the perception of beauty and the physical body also warrants further examination. The medieval preoccupation with mortality, coupled with the Church's emphasis on spiritual purity, often led to a complex relationship with bodily beauty. While physical attractiveness might have held some appeal, the focus on the soul's imperishable nature frequently overshadowed the significance of earthly beauty. This often resulted in a deprecation of the body's sensual aspects, further contributing to the restrained views on sexual expression prevalent in much of medieval society. The contrast between the idealized depictions of courtly love in medieval literature and the harsh realities of life is also noteworthy. The romanticized portrayals of passionate love and idealized relationships often stand in sharp contrast to the precarious existence and high mortality rates experienced by many in the medieval world. This dissonance highlights the gap between idealized romantic notions and the practical constraints imposed by the constant threat of disease, war, and famine. Moreover, the social class of an individual significantly influenced their experience of death and its impact on their sexual attitudes. The wealthy and powerful had access to better health care, more comfortable living conditions, and a greater ability to control their environments. They therefore may have experienced a somewhat less pronounced sense of mortality's omnipresence compared to the vast majority of the population who lived with a constant awareness of their vulnerability to disease and deprivation. This difference in social experience shaped perceptions of sexuality and the expression of desire. The presence of plague, particularly the Black Death, served as a particularly potent catalyst in reshaping attitudes towards death and sexuality. The sheer scale of death and suffering during the various outbreaks of the plague generated a pervasive sense of fear and despair. This existential crisis prompted some to abandon all restraint and engage in hedonistic pursuits, while others turned to fervent religious devotion in an attempt to find solace and meaning. The plague's impact on social structures and relationships profoundly altered perceptions of life and its transient nature, further influencing how sexuality was perceived and expressed in the aftermath of these devastating events. Furthermore, the changing societal structures influenced the approach to sexuality in response to death. The rise of towns and cities, while leading to greater anonymity and some opportunities for less regulated sexual behavior, also brought new forms of social control. The growing power of the church and the establishment of more formalized legal systems provided more structures for regulating sexual conduct, reinforcing the existing restrictions and anxieties surrounding sexuality. This blend of opportunities and controls further complicated the medieval experience of death and sexuality. The historical record, however, remains incomplete and often fragmented, making it challenging to draw definitive conclusions about the diverse spectrum of medieval attitudes towards death and sexuality. The scarcity of personal accounts and intimate confessions makes reconstructing the lived experience of individuals a complex and demanding task. Yet, through careful analysis of the available evidence, encompassing religious texts, legal documents, literature, and art, historians can gradually piece together a more nuanced picture of how the ever present specter of death shaped the perception and expression of sexuality in the Middle Ages. The resulting understanding is complex and often paradoxical, reflecting the inherent contradictions and uncertainties of the human condition in an era where life was constantly overshadowed by the knowledge of its own finite nature. This interplay of fear, faith, desire, and constraint presents a fascinating case study in the multifaceted relationship between mortality and human sexuality throughout history. The understanding of medieval sexuality, inseparable from the constant awareness of death, provides a compelling lens through which we can reflect upon our own relationship with mortality and the way it shapes the human experience. The pervasive shadow of death, as explored in the preceding sections, cast a long and chilling influence over all aspects of medieval life, including the realm of health and particularly sexual health. Medieval understanding of the human body, particularly its reproductive functions, was rudimentary at best, a patchwork of ancient Greek humoral theory, religious dogma, and folk remedies. This limited understanding inevitably led to medical practices that were, by modern standards, ineffective and frequently harmful. The very notion of human anatomy was shrouded in a veil of incomplete knowledge. Detailed dissections were largely prohibited by religious restrictions, limiting the opportunity for accurate observation and understanding. Instead, medical texts often relied on ancient authorities like Galen, whose anatomical descriptions, while influential, were frequently inaccurate or incomplete. This lack of anatomical precision hindered the diagnosis and treatment of any number of ailments, including those related to sexual and reproductive health. For instance, the understanding of female anatomy was particularly flawed, leading to misconceptions about menstruation, childbirth, and various gynecological conditions. The uterus, often depicted as a wandering organ prone to displacement, was believed to be the source of a plethora of illnesses, from melancholia to hysteria, with treatments often aimed at repositioning this errant organ. This imprecise understanding extended to the realm of sexual health. Sexually transmitted infections, STIs, while undoubtedly present, were poorly understood and frequently misdiagnosed. Symptoms often overlapped with other conditions, making it difficult to distinguish between, for example, syphilis, gonorrhea, or even the more commonplace consequences of poor hygiene. Treatments varied wildly, ranging from the application of dubious herbal concoctions to the use of caustic substances that often caused more harm than good. Mercury, for example, was a popular yet incredibly toxic remedy for a variety of conditions, including syphilis, often leading to severe complications and even death. The lack of effective treatments for STIs had profound consequences on medieval society. The spread of such infections was largely unchecked, resulting in significant morbidity and mortality, particularly among vulnerable populations. The high incidence of STIs also likely contributed to infertility and other reproductive problems, further shaping societal attitudes towards sexuality and reproduction. The social stigma associated with these conditions often prevented individuals from seeking medical attention, exacerbating the problem. Pregnancy and childbirth presented a particularly perilous chapter in the lives of medieval women. Maternal mortality rates were staggeringly high, often exceeding 10%, a reflection of the limited understanding of obstetrics and the lack of sterile practices. Childbirth was a visceral and frequently traumatic experience, with complications such as postpartum hemorrhage, infection, and eclampsia posing significant risks to the mother's life. The common medical interventions frequently made matters worse. The reliance on herbal remedies and often superstitious practices, such as the use of charms and amulets, reflected the lack of effective medical interventions. Abortion, while condemned by the Church, was likely practiced, albeit often in dangerous and secretive circumstances. The methods employed, ranging from herbal abortifacients to physical manipulation, were frequently hazardous, carrying a high risk of complications, including infection, hemorrhage, and even death. The lack of access to safe and effective methods of contraception further contributed to the high incidence of unwanted pregnancies and the resulting high mortality risk associated with attempted abortions. Male sexual health also posed its challenges in the medieval world. Impotence, often attributed to an imbalance of humors or witchcraft, was a significant concern. Treatments ranged from herbal remedies and dietary changes to more unorthodox methods, reflecting a range of beliefs and understandings or misunderstandings about the male reproductive system. Similarly, conditions such as prostatitis and other urinary tract infections were treated with a variety of remedies, some effective, many not. The absence of reliable diagnostic tools and the limited understanding of the underlying causes frequently hindered effective treatment. The role of religion further complicated the landscape of medieval medical practices. The Church's influence extended to all aspects of life, including healthcare. The prevailing religious worldview emphasized the spiritual aspects of illness and often viewed physical ailments as divine punishment or the manifestation of spiritual imbalance. This perspective often led to spiritual remedies such as prayer, penance, and pilgrimage as primary treatments, often overshadowing or completely replacing more empirically based approaches. The Church's condemnation of certain medical practices, like abortion, further limited access to potentially life-saving interventions. The social stratification of medieval society also influenced the availability and quality of medical care. The wealthy and powerful had access to a wider range of treatments and better quality care compared to the poor. Physicians, surgeons, and midwives who catered to the upper classes often possessed more advanced skills and knowledge, although their effectiveness still varied greatly. The poor were often reliant on local healers and folk remedies, often facing greater risks and experiencing inferior outcomes. The contrast between the sophisticated literary and artistic representations of courtly love and the often brutal reality of medieval medical practices related to sexuality reveals a fascinating paradox. The idealized notion of romance and the idealized portrayal of the human body often stood in sharp contrast to the prevailing ignorance and the potentially harmful practices employed to address sexual and reproductive health concerns. In conclusion, medieval medical practices related to sexual health were a far cry from the scientific medicine of today. The limited understanding of human anatomy and physiology, the influence of religious dogma, and the social inequalities of the time all combined to shape a healthcare system that was often ineffective and sometimes dangerous. The gap between medieval understanding and modern medical knowledge is vast, but examining these practices offers invaluable insight into the social, cultural, and religious forces that shaped perceptions of the human body, sexuality, and health in the Middle Ages. This exploration underscores the remarkable progress achieved in medical science and the importance of continued efforts to improve healthcare access and outcomes for all people. The stark reality of life and death in the medieval period, as reflected in the often ineffective attempts to address sexual health challenges, provides a compelling counterpoint to the idealized representations of love and romance, thereby offering a more comprehensive view of the complexity of medieval life. The stories contained within this history, stories of suffering, hope, and resilience, remind us of the enduring human struggle for health and well-being across the vast expanse of time. The pervasive presence of disease extended far beyond the realm of sexually transmitted infections, casting a long shadow over the intimacy and sexual relationships of medieval individuals. Common illnesses, often debilitating and recurrent, significantly impacted the ability to engage in sexual activity. A simple bout of influenza, for example, could leave an individual weak, feverish, and utterly lacking the energy for physical intimacy. More serious conditions, such as dysentery or pneumonia, could confine individuals to bed for extended periods, effectively putting an end to any sexual activity for weeks or even months. The sheer exhaustion and discomfort associated with these ailments would have rendered sexual relations not only undesirable, but often physically impossible. The impact of chronic diseases on sexual health and well-being was even more profound. Conditions such as tuberculosis, a disease prevalent throughout the Middle Ages, could severely weaken the body, leading to chronic fatigue, persistent coughing, and debilitating night sweats. These symptoms would have made intimacy challenging, if not impossible, and the fear of contagion would have further inhibited sexual contact. The social stigma associated with tuberculosis, coupled with the fear of transmission, likely led to isolation and loneliness, significantly impacting both physical and emotional intimacy. Beyond the physical limitations, the emotional toll of chronic illness had a profound effect on sexual relationships. The constant anxiety surrounding the unpredictable nature of the disease, coupled with the fear of death, could create distance and strain within couples. The prospect of infecting one's partner, particularly for diseases like tuberculosis, would add another layer of emotional complexity to an already challenging situation. Furthermore, the physical changes brought on by prolonged illness, weight loss, skin lesions, persistent coughing, might affect the self image of individuals, impacting their self esteem and their confidence in intimacy. The impact of disease on intimacy wasn't limited to physical incapacity or emotional distress. It also played a significant role in shaping the dynamics of sexual relationships. The uncertainty surrounding illness and recovery might lead to anxiety and tension between partners. The physical and emotional burden of caring for a chronically ill partner could strain a relationship, creating resentment and frustration. Conversely, the experience of shared adversity, navigating illness together, could strengthen the bond between partners, fostering a deeper sense of empathy and mutual support. The lack of effective medical interventions further complicated the situation. While some herbal remedies or folk practices might have been employed to alleviate symptoms or manage conditions, the overall effectiveness was limited, leading to prolonged periods of illness and uncertainty. The absence of reliable treatments resulted in considerable social and economic repercussions, as individuals with chronic illnesses often faced significant challenges in participating fully in daily life, their roles and responsibilities heavily compromised. Beyond chronic illnesses like tuberculosis, a wide range of conditions affected sexual health and intimacy. Gynecological problems, poorly understood and frequently misdiagnosed, affected a significant portion of the female population. Menstrual irregularities, infections, and painful conditions like endometriosis, which may have been more prevalent than initially thought, caused discomfort, pain, and could render sexual intercourse difficult or impossible. The limited understanding of female anatomy and reproductive systems meant that treatment options were often ineffective and occasionally dangerous. For men, conditions like prostatitis, urinary tract infections, and even hernias could impact sexual function and overall well being. Impotence, often attributed to supernatural causes or an imbalance of humors, was a significant concern, impacting not only sexual health but also self esteem and a man's sense of masculinity. The treatment options available were often ineffective, relying on herbal remedies and superstitious practices rather than scientific understanding. The social consequences of these illnesses were far reaching. Individuals suffering from chronic or debilitating conditions faced social stigma and isolation. Fear of contagion led to social distancing and the avoidance of close contact. The economic consequences of prolonged illness could be devastating, pushing families into poverty and further exacerbating their suffering. The inability to work, coupled with the expense of treatment, what little there was, could lead to social ruin and even ostracism. Moreover, the cultural beliefs and perceptions surrounding illness had a significant impact on sexual relationships. The prevailing religious worldview often attributed illness to divine punishment or the manifestation of spiritual imbalance. This could lead to feelings of guilt and shame among those afflicted, creating barriers to intimacy and open communication. Furthermore, the perception of illness as a sign of impurity or uncleanliness could lead to social rejection and further isolate individuals. It is essential to acknowledge the absence of detailed records regarding the specifics of sexual activity within the context of medieval disease. The lack of widespread literacy, the social stigma surrounding sexuality, and the privacy of intimate relationships mean that our knowledge is largely based on inference and interpretation of available sources. However, the evidence that does exist, gleaned from medical texts, religious writings, and anecdotal accounts, paints a picture of profound impact of disease on intimacy and the broader social context of medieval sexuality. Even seemingly minor illnesses, like the common cold or a bout of diarrhea, while often short-lived, could temporarily disrupt intimacy and impact overall well-being. The cumulative effect of these frequent minor ailments, combined with the ever-present threat of more serious illnesses, underscores the challenging realities of medieval life and how deeply health, or rather ill health, influenced the experience of human relationships. Furthermore, the prevailing medical practices of the time, despite their limitations and potential harm, reflected an attempt to address the physical and emotional consequences of disease on sexual health. The use of herbal remedies, magical charms, and prayers, while lacking scientific basis from a modern perspective, served as a testament to the desire to maintain intimacy and manage the challenges posed by illness within the social and religious contexts of the Middle Ages. The interplay of disease, social attitudes, and religious beliefs created a complex tapestry of experiences surrounding intimacy and sexual relationships during the Middle Ages. While our understanding is inevitably limited, the available evidence suggests that the pervasive presence of illness shaped not only the physical capacity for sexual activity, but also the emotional and social dynamics of intimate relationships, leaving an indelible mark on the lives of medieval men and women. The enduring challenges faced by medieval individuals navigating intimacy within the shadow of disease remind us of the resilience of the human spirit and the ever-present connection between health and the tapestry of human relationships, regardless of the historical period. The lingering shadow of disease, as discussed previously, profoundly impacted medieval sexual practices, creating a stark contrast with modern experiences. While modern medicine has dramatically altered the landscape of sexual health, certain fundamental aspects of human sexuality, desire, intimacy, and the social dynamics surrounding it exhibit remarkable continuity across centuries. However, the context in which these aspects are expressed differs greatly. One of the most striking differences lies in the sheer prevalence and impact of disease. In the Middle Ages, infectious diseases were a constant and pervasive threat, significantly influencing the frequency, nature, and even the possibility of sexual activity. The fear of contagion, often coupled with a lack of understanding of disease transmission, led to various precautionary measures, some effective, many not. The prevalence of sexually transmitted infections, like syphilis, although not fully understood at the time, contributed to anxieties and shaped sexual behavior in ways unimaginable in the modern era with readily available antibiotics and widespread public health initiatives. Modern preventative measures, such as condoms and other forms of barrier contraception, simply didn't exist, leaving individuals vulnerable and highlighting the stark difference in risk profiles. Moreover, the very understanding of the human body and its functions was vastly different. Medieval medical knowledge was heavily influenced by the humoral theory, which viewed the body as a delicate balance of four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Imbalances in these humors were believed to be the root cause of most illnesses, including those affecting sexual health. This understanding, coupled with the strong influence of religious dogma, significantly shaped attitudes towards sexuality and reproductive health. For instance, the perception of menstruation as an impure state influenced sexual practices, with limitations placed on intercourse during this period. Such practices stand in stark contrast to the modern understanding of the menstrual cycle as a natural and healthy bodily function. The social context also played a pivotal role. In the Middle Ages, sexuality was often interwoven with religious beliefs and social hierarchies. The church held significant sway over moral and social norms, influencing attitudes towards premarital sex, adultery, and homosexuality. The prevailing moral code heavily condemned extramarital sex and same sex relations, often leading to severe social and legal repercussions. Although modern societies continue to grapple with issues of sexual morality, the legal and social frameworks surrounding sexuality have undergone significant shifts. The legal recognition of same sex relationships and increased acceptance of diverse sexual orientations mark a significant departure from the restrictive and punitive social environment of the Middle Ages. However, some aspects of sexual behavior exhibit surprising continuity. The fundamental human drive for intimacy and connection, the importance of emotional bonds in sexual relationships, and the role of pleasure remain constant across time periods. While the expression of these aspects may have been shaped by different social norms and levels of medical knowledge, the underlying human needs and desires persist. In both eras, love, affection, and emotional intimacy played a significant role in shaping sexual relationships, although the public expression of such feelings differed considerably. Medieval expressions of affection, often constrained by social conventions and religious expectations, stand in contrast to the greater freedom of expression characterizing many modern relationships. Consider the concept of courtship and marriage. In the Middle Ages, marriages were often arranged for economic and social reasons, rather than based on romantic love. While arranged marriages still exist in some cultures today, modern Western societies emphasize romantic love and personal choice as fundamental components of marriage. However, the importance of family and social networks in shaping romantic relationships remains, albeit with a different balance between individual autonomy and family expectations. The role of women in medieval society also presented a significant difference compared to modern times. Women often had limited agency in their sexual lives. their choices dictated largely by family and social structures. Although the modern era has witnessed significant progress in women's rights and sexual autonomy, inequalities and societal biases persist. The historical comparison reveals both progress and persistent challenges regarding gender equality in sexual relations. The role of procreation, another significant difference, needs attention. In the Middle Ages, procreation was often the primary purpose of sexual activity, a perspective embedded within the social and religious fabric. Modern attitudes towards procreation are far more diverse and reflect changing social values and advances in reproductive technologies. The availability of contraception and reproductive choices grants modern individuals far greater control over their reproductive lives than their medieval counterparts possessed. Modern attitudes towards procreation are far more nuanced, influenced by factors such as career aspirations, personal desires, and economic stability. Furthermore, the communication surrounding sexuality differs significantly. In the Middle Ages, open discussion of sexual matters was largely taboo, particularly among the common people. Open communication about sexuality is much more prevalent in modern societies, driven by educational campaigns and increased awareness about sexual health. This change significantly impacts individual knowledge and empowerment regarding sexual health and decision making. However, even with these differences, the underlying emotional and psychological aspects of sexuality show remarkable consistency. The experience of love, desire, jealousy, and heartbreak resonates across time, suggesting that despite the vast changes in social norms and medical understanding, certain fundamental aspects of the human experience remain constant. The human need for connection and intimacy is timeless. Analyzing medieval and modern sexual practices thus reveals a complex tapestry of similarities and differences, highlighting both the continuity of fundamental human drives and the profound transformations shaped by societal changes and advancements in medicine and social understanding. The medieval experience provides a lens through which to understand the unique complexities of modern sexuality, reminding us that while the context changes, the essence of human intimacy persists. Understanding this continuity and change is crucial to fostering a more holistic understanding of human sexuality in its multifaceted form across history. The parallels and divergences highlight the profound impact of socio-cultural forces on sexual practices. The comparative study demonstrates that the human experience of intimacy is inherently dynamic, shaped and reshaped by societal norms, religious beliefs, technological advancements, and medical understanding. By analyzing these historical contrasts, we gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities of human sexuality and its ever evolving nature. The persistence of certain sexual beliefs across centuries reveals a fascinating interplay between enduring human instincts and the ever shifting sands of societal norms and scientific understanding. While the overt expression and social acceptance of sexuality have undergone dramatic transformations, some underlying attitudes and anxieties show surprising resilience. Consider, for instance, the enduring anxieties surrounding female sexuality. In the Middle Ages, the female body was often viewed through a lens of suspicion and fear. Her reproductive capabilities, both revered and feared. Menstruation, as previously mentioned, was perceived as a state of impurity, a belief rooted in humoral theory and reinforced by religious doctrines. This perception impacted sexual practices, dictating periods of abstinence and influencing attitudes towards female agency within sexual relationships. While modern medicine has dispelled the humoral theory and scientific understanding of menstruation has radically shifted, a subtle echo of these medieval anxieties persists in contemporary society. Although openly condemned as scientifically unfounded, the lingering association of menstruation with impurity manifests in various subtle ways. In the persistent marketing of products designed to mask or control menstruation, in the persistent shame and secrecy surrounding this natural bodily function, and even in the subconscious anxieties some individuals still hold regarding sexual activity during menstruation. The narrative surrounding female sexuality continues to be shaped by a complex interplay of cultural influences, even though the overt justifications have changed. Furthermore, the fear of STIs, though drastically altered by medical advancements, retains a significant, albeit transformed, presence. While the medieval world lacked the understanding of microbial pathogens that fuels contemporary STI prevention, the fear of venereal disease was a tangible force shaping sexual behavior. The devastating impact of syphilis, for instance, instilled profound anxieties about sexual contact, leading to precautionary measures often rooted in superstition as much as practicality. The modern era, equipped with antibiotics, testing, and preventative measures, confronts STIs with a different set of tools. Yet, the underlying anxiety about sexual health remains. The shift is not a complete absence of fear, but rather a transformation of its form. Modern anxieties may focus on the long-term consequences of untreated infections, the emotional toll of a diagnosis, and the social stigma associated with certain STIs, rather than the immediate, life-threatening nature of the diseases prevalent in the Middle Ages. The persistent cultural association of specific sexual acts with moral transgression also exemplifies the tenacity of certain beliefs. While the legal and social consequences of homosexuality have lessened significantly in many parts of the world, the historical association of certain sexual orientations with moral deviancy still casts a long shadow. The medieval church's condemnation of same-sex relations, deeply rooted in religious dogma and often reinforced by legal persecution, left an indelible mark on societal attitudes. Although legal frameworks have evolved and societal acceptance of diverse sexual orientations has demonstrably increased in some regions, deep-seated prejudices stemming from this historical legacy persist in various forms, manifesting in subtle biases, discriminatory practices, and lingering anxieties within both individuals and societal structures. The evolution is not simply a replacement of one set of beliefs with another, but rather a process of negotiation between the past and the present. Even attitudes towards procreation, while significantly altered by the availability of contraception and reproductive technologies, reveal intriguing echoes of medieval perspectives. In the Middle Ages, procreation was often viewed as the primary, almost sole, justification for sexual activity, a viewpoint strongly entrenched in religious and social norms. Modern societies present a vastly more diverse landscape of reproductive attitudes influenced by personal choices, career aspirations, economic considerations, and evolving concepts of family structure. However, the cultural importance attached to procreation, though expressed differently, remains significant in many segments of society. The societal pressure to have children, the lingering cultural ideals of a traditional family unit, and the emotional significance attributed to parenthood all point to a continuity, albeit transformed, of the medieval emphasis on procreation. The shift is not a rejection, but a recontextualization of the value assigned to parenthood. The enduring influence of religion on perceptions of sexuality, though expressed differently in modern times, continues to shape attitudes and behaviors. The Church's significant role in medieval society, influencing every aspect of life, including sexual mores, left a lasting impression on cultural norms. While the religious influence on sexuality is arguably less pervasive in secular modern societies, faith based institutions and beliefs continue to significantly impact the individual lives and moral frameworks of many people. The debates surrounding contraception, abortion, and same sex marriage often center around religious beliefs, demonstrating the continued relevance of religious perspectives in shaping contemporary attitudes towards sexuality. The evolution lies not in the absence of religion's influence, but in the diversification and negotiation of its impact on a more pluralistic society. The social control exerted over sexual expression, while markedly altered, still retains some parallels. While the blatant public shaming and legal persecution of sexual deviancy that characterized the Middle Ages are largely absent in modern Western societies, subtle forms of social control persist. The pressure to conform to societal expectations regarding sexual behavior, the pervasive influence of media portrayals of sexuality, and the ever present fear of judgment based on sexual choices or preferences all represent modern forms of social control. The medieval reliance on religious institutions and legal systems to enforce sexual norms has been partly replaced by the less formal but no less powerful influence of social media, peer pressure, and popular culture. In conclusion, the historical study of sexuality reveals a complex interplay of continuity and change. While many aspects of sexual practices and beliefs have undergone dramatic transformations, certain underlying anxieties, attitudes, and cultural influences exhibit remarkable persistence. The fear of disease, the lingering influence of religious beliefs, the societal regulation of sexual expression, and the cultural framing of female sexuality all demonstrate a dynamic interaction between historical legacies and contemporary realities. The evolution of sexual beliefs and practices, therefore, is not a simple linear progression, but a complex and ongoing negotiation between the past and the present, shaped by shifting scientific understandings, changing social norms, and the enduring power of human desires and anxieties. Understanding this intricate interplay is crucial to developing a more nuanced and comprehensive appreciation of human sexuality across time and cultures. The study of medieval sexuality, far from being a dusty exercise in historical curiosity, offers surprisingly relevant insights into the human condition. By examining the complexities of sexual attitudes and practices in the Middle Ages, we gain a deeper understanding of the enduring interplay between biology, culture, and religious belief that continues to shape our own perceptions of sexuality. One of the most significant lessons emerges from the realization that the anxieties surrounding sexuality are not unique to our time. The fear of disease, the societal pressure to conform to established norms, and the inherent ambiguity of desire are recurring themes throughout history. While the specific manifestations of these anxieties may differ, the underlying emotional and social dynamics remain remarkably consistent. The medieval period, characterized by its deeply religious and hierarchical social structures, witnessed a profound intertwining of religious doctrine and sexual morality. The Church's influence permeated virtually every aspect of life, including the regulation of sexual behavior, the condemnation of certain sexual acts, particularly those outside the bounds of heterosexual marriage intended for procreation, was not merely a matter of religious dogma, but was also deeply embedded in the social and political order. This control extended beyond simple prohibitions. It encompassed detailed regulations on courtship, marriage, and even the permissible expressions of affection within marriage itself. For example, the concept of connubium, the legal and religious union of marriage, strictly defined the parameters of acceptable sexual activity, emphasizing procreation as its primary and often solely accepted purpose. Sexual acts outside this sanctioned framework were not just morally condemned, but also subject to varying degrees of legal sanction, ranging from fines and excommunication to imprisonment and even death in extreme cases. Understanding the pervasive influence of the Church in medieval society is crucial to grasping the context of sexual anxieties and practices. The Church's power extended far beyond religious matters. It played a significant role in regulating social life, influencing legal systems, and providing social services. This institutional authority imbued its teachings on sexuality with a weighty force that shaped the everyday lives of individuals and communities. Consequently, the anxieties surrounding sexual transgressions were often inextricably linked to the fear of divine retribution and the potential for social ostracism. This fear, deeply rooted in the cultural landscape, acted as a powerful mechanism of social control, reinforcing the rigid norms and expectations surrounding sexual behavior. It's important to note that the Church's stance on sexuality wasn't monolithic. Interpretations and enforcement varied across different regions and periods, leading to a degree of nuance and regional variation in practice. However, the limitations of this religious framework become apparent when we examine non-normative sexualities. While the Church vehemently condemned homosexual acts, historical evidence suggests a more fluid reality. Recent scholarship challenges the simplistic narrative of widespread persecution, highlighting the existence of same-sex relationships and practices despite the significant risks involved. The persistence of such relationships, even in the face of condemnation and potential punishment, underscores the resilience of human desire and the inherent limitations of attempts to completely control individual behaviors through religious or legal means. The The lives of individuals who engaged in same sex relationships were inevitably marked by secrecy and vulnerability, but their existence demonstrates that the official doctrines did not always translate into absolute social control. Another vital lesson learned from studying medieval sexuality centers on the pervasive influence of medical theories on sexual practices and attitudes. The humoral theory, prevalent in medieval medicine, significantly shaped perceptions of the body and its functions, including sexuality. This theory, based on the balance of four bodily humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, provided a framework for understanding health and disease. The humoral model also influenced beliefs about sexual health and reproduction, with menstruation, pregnancy, and childbirth all viewed through the lens of humoral balance. Any imbalance was associated with a range of physical and psychological symptoms, impacting individuals' understanding of their bodies and their sexual capacities. These beliefs often led to specific practices, such as regulating sexual activity during menstruation or pregnancy to maintain humoral balance. Even the idea of female impurity during menstruation, still debated in some circles today, reflects the continued impact of centuries old beliefs. The concept of contagion also played a significant role in shaping medieval's sexual attitudes. The fear of venereal diseases, particularly syphilis, profoundly influenced sexual behavior, leading to practices designed to prevent or mitigate the risks of infection. While the understanding of disease transmission was vastly different from our current scientific knowledge, the anxiety surrounding STIs reflects a timeless concern about health and physical well-being. These anxieties interacted with prevailing social and religious norms, creating complex relationships between sexual practice and fear of disease, both physical and spiritual. For example, the fear of syphilis led to moralistic interpretations of disease as a divine punishment for sinful behavior. Furthermore, medieval attitudes towards procreation reveal insights into the relationship between sex, social roles, and family structures. While procreation was the ideal within marriage, the realities of medieval life were often far more complex. High infant and child mortality rates, economic pressures, and social hierarchies all shaped individuals' reproductive choices. The idealization of large families contrasted with the harsh realities of limited resources and high mortality. The notion of family and its structure were deeply embedded in the social and economic fabric of the era. In this context, both sexual practices and reproductive outcomes held profound significance, extending beyond the simple act of procreation to encompass issues of inheritance, social status, and economic stability. This perspective highlights the interconnectedness of sexuality with wider social and economic structures. Finally, the study of medieval sexuality highlights the importance of historical context in understanding attitudes and practices. Applying modern frameworks and ethical judgments to historical events risks distorting our understanding of the past. The social, religious, and medical contexts of the Middle Ages were fundamentally different from our own, necessitating a critical engagement with historical sources. However, by understanding the complexities of medieval attitudes, we gain a richer appreciation of the historical roots of contemporary anxieties, behaviors, and debates surrounding sexuality. The study of the past offers a valuable opportunity for self reflection, allowing us to critically examine our own assumptions and beliefs in the context of human experience over time. In conclusion, the lessons learned from medieval sexuality emphasize the continuities and changes in human experiences related to sex and sexuality and reproduction. The fears, desires, and social dynamics surrounding sexuality are not merely products of our modern world, but have deep historical roots. By examining medieval attitudes and practices, we gain a valuable perspective on the enduring complexities of human behavior, illuminating the interplay of biology, culture, religion, and social structures in shaping our understanding of ourselves and our relationships. This understanding allows us to appreciate the nuances of sexual expression across time and cultures, fostering a more informed and compassionate approach to sexuality in the present. The past, in this case, is not simply a prologue, it is a vital key to understanding the present. The medieval world, with its rigid social hierarchies and pervasive religious influence, might seem a universe apart from our own. Yet, beneath the surface of vastly different cultural norms and practices, a surprisingly relatable human experience emerges: the enduring experience of sexuality. While the expressions of desire and the social frameworks governing sexual behavior differed drastically, the fundamental emotions, anxieties, and desires remain remarkably consistent across centuries. The medieval individual, grappling with the complexities of love, lust, and procreation, navigated a landscape not entirely dissimilar to our own, albeit within a different cultural context. Consider, for instance, the anxieties surrounding reproduction. In the medieval world, high infant and child mortality rates were a stark reality. The desire for offspring, deeply rooted in the need for inheritance and family continuity, was often met with devastating loss. This constant threat of death cast a long shadow over the sexual act, imbuing it with a potent mixture of hope and fear. The intense desire for a healthy child, a living heir to carry on the family name and legacy, was interwoven with the ever present possibility of grief and disappointment. This emotional tension, the simultaneous yearning for and fear of the outcome of sexual activity, is a profoundly human experience, echoed in countless modern narratives. While the medical understanding of conception and birth was rudimentary compared to our current knowledge, the underlying emotional currents remain undeniably familiar. Moreover, the medieval preoccupation with the humoral theory of medicine, while seemingly archaic, offers intriguing parallels to modern concerns about physical and emotional well being. The belief that bodily balance, achieved through a harmonious equilibrium of humors, was essential for health and fertility, shaped perceptions of sexual health and reproductive capacity. Practices aimed at maintaining this balance, such as dietary restrictions during menstruation or abstinence during specific periods, reflect a deep seated desire to optimize physical and mental well being through lifestyle choices. This concern, translated into the medieval framework of humoral theory, is mirrored today in our pursuit of healthy lifestyles, mindful eating, and practices intended to enhance fertility and reproductive health. While the language and specific practices differ greatly, the underlying human desire to maintain physical well being and maximize reproductive success transcends centuries. The complex interplay between social expectations, religious doctrines, and individual desires further connects the medieval experience with our contemporary understanding of sexuality. The Church's powerful influence, as we've seen, exerted considerable control over sexual behavior, emphasizing procreation within the bounds of heterosexual marriage as the sole morally acceptable purpose of sex. However, history reveals the limitations of such attempts at complete social control. The existence of same sex relationships, despite the inherent risks and potential for severe punishment, points to the resilience of human desire and the inherent limitations of social norms in shaping individual behaviors. This resonates deeply with modern struggles for sexual liberation and the ongoing debate about the relationship between social norms and individual expression. Furthermore, the social structures of the Middle Ages, marked by rigid class distinctions and patriarchal hierarchies, profoundly shaped sexual practices and attitudes. Marriage, viewed primarily as an economic and social contract, often involved a significant disparity in power dynamics between husband and wife. While the specifics of these power imbalances differ greatly from contemporary contexts, the underlying tension between individual desires and social structures remains a common feature throughout history. This tension, manifested differently depending on time and context, remains a recurring theme in the human experience of sexuality. The fear of disease also serves as a striking point of connection between the medieval and modern worlds. The medieval preoccupation with venereal disease, though fueled by vastly different medical understanding, mirrors our contemporary anxieties about sexually transmitted infections, STIs. The practices undertaken to mitigate the risk of disease, from abstinence to the use of various, often ineffective remedies, reflect a timeless human concern about physical safety and well-being. The fear of contagion, a driving force behind many medieval sexual practices, is echoed in our modern awareness of STI prevention and safe sex practices. While the scientific basis for our understanding of disease has advanced considerably, the fundamental human desire to protect one's health and the anxiety associated with the potential transmission of disease continue to shape sexual behavior across centuries. The concept of female impurity during menstruation, deeply embedded in medieval beliefs, provides a poignant example of the enduring influence of cultural narratives on perceptions of the female body. While the specific medical justifications have been discredited, the underlying notion of a fundamental difference between male and female bodies and the subsequent impact on social roles and behaviors continues to resonate in many cultures today. The historical context is crucial to understanding these beliefs, but recognizing the persistent influence of such narratives across time highlights the long-standing cultural construction of gender and its impact on sexual experiences and perceptions. Even the anxieties surrounding courtship and the establishment of marital relationships reveal surprisingly relatable aspects. The pressures to conform to social norms and familial expectations, The complexities of romantic love versus pragmatic considerations, and the challenges of balancing individual desires with community expectations are all themes that resonate strongly with modern experiences. Whether in the medieval context of arranged marriages or in contemporary society's diverse range of relationship dynamics, the fundamental human desire for connection, intimacy, and companionship persists, alongside the social pressures that often shape and sometimes constrain the expression of these desires. The study of medieval sexuality, therefore, is not merely an academic pursuit. It is a journey into the heart of the enduring human experience. While the specific cultural frameworks and beliefs differ drastically from our own, the underlying emotions, anxieties, desires, and social dynamics remain remarkably consistent. By examining the complexities of medieval attitudes and practices, we gain a deeper understanding of the enduring aspects of human sexuality, appreciating the universality of human experience across vast stretches of time. This understanding allows us to engage more thoughtfully with contemporary debates about sexuality, acknowledging the historical roots of our own anxieties and recognizing the complexities that have shaped and continue to shape human relationships and sexual expression across cultures and time periods. The past, far from being irrelevant, offers a valuable lens through which to examine the present, highlighting both the continuities and changes in the human experience of sexuality. It serves as a powerful reminder of the enduring power of human desire and the complex interplay between biology, culture, religion, and social structures in shaping our understanding of ourselves and our relationships. Having journeyed through the complexities of medieval sexuality, from the anxieties surrounding reproduction to the social constraints imposed by religious dogma and rigid social hierarchies, we arrive at a fascinating conclusion. The human experience, in its most fundamental aspects, transcends the vast chasm of time separating us from the medieval world. While the specifics of daily life, medical understanding, and cultural norms differed dramatically, the core emotions, love, desire, fear, joy, grief, remain strikingly familiar. The yearning for connection, the anxieties surrounding intimacy, the desire for healthy offspring, the fear of disease and social judgment, these are emotions that echo across centuries, resonating with our own contemporary experiences. Consider the simple act of bathing. In the medieval period, access to clean water and regular bathing was a privilege enjoyed primarily by the elite. The absence of modern plumbing and sanitation systems meant that personal hygiene practices were vastly different from our own. Yet, the fundamental human desire for cleanliness and the associated sense of well-being persist. The medieval emphasis on cleanliness, often intertwined with religious ritual and humoral theory, reflects a similar human drive to maintain physical and mental well-being, albeit expressed through different cultural practices and understanding. Today, our access to hot running water, showers, and an abundance of personal hygiene products makes the task far easier and more commonplace, but the underlying human need remains constant. Similarly, consider the complexities of courtship and marriage. While arranged marriages were commonplace in the medieval period, and social expectations often heavily influenced marital choices. The fundamental human desire for companionship, love, and mutual understanding remains a constant throughout history. The tension between societal expectations and personal desires, the challenges of navigating power dynamics within a relationship, and the joys and sorrows of family life. These universal themes transcend temporal and cultural boundaries. Today, our choices may be broader, our understanding of romantic relationships potentially more nuanced, but the challenges and rewards of forging lasting bonds remain profoundly similar. The fear of disease, a constant presence in the medieval world, resonates profoundly with modern anxieties. While the specific diseases and their treatments differed drastically, the underlying fear of contagion and the desire to protect oneself and loved ones remains a powerful driver of behavior. The medieval preoccupation with venereal disease and other infectious illnesses, the rudimentary medical understanding, and the reliance on often ineffective remedies all reflect a fundamental human drive to survive and thrive. The striking similarity between medieval practices aimed at disease prevention and our contemporary emphasis on safe sex and STI prevention illustrates the enduring power of this primal fear and the universality of the drive to protect oneself. Modern science has empowered us with significantly more effective methods of prevention and treatment, but the underlying anxiety and the drive to protect ourselves and others remains strikingly similar. Furthermore, the social inequalities that permeated medieval society, while vastly different in their manifestations, still resonate with contemporary concerns about power dynamics and social justice. The rigid class structure, the patriarchal hierarchies that governed relationships, and the resulting limitations on individual agency have parallels in many modern contexts. The struggle for equality, the ongoing fight against discrimination, and the continuous pursuit of social justice, all these reflect the enduring human desire for a fair and equitable society. While the specifics of social structures have changed, the fundamental human drive for justice and equality, regardless of class, gender, or other social categories, remains constant. Even the seemingly antiquated humoral theory of medicine, prevalent in the medieval world, offers a surprisingly relatable aspect. This theory, based on the balance of four bodily humors, influenced understandings of health, illness, and fertility. While it lacks a scientific basis, the underlying concept of maintaining bodily balance for optimal health finds echoes in contemporary concepts of wellness and preventative health care. Our modern emphasis on healthy lifestyles, nutrition, and stress management are contemporary manifestations of this same underlying desire to achieve physical and mental well-being. The methods may be advanced, the science more sophisticated, but the underlying motivation mirrors that of our medieval predecessors. In conclusion, the study of medieval sexuality is not simply an exercise in historical reconstruction. It is a powerful reminder of the enduring aspects of the human experience. While the material conditions, technological advancements, and cultural norms of the medieval period were drastically different from our own, the fundamental aspects of love, desire, fear, and social interaction have endured across centuries. The surprisingly relatable aspects of medieval life challenge us to look beyond superficial differences and recognize the shared human experiences that bind us across vast stretches of time. The enduring themes of longing, connection, fear of disease and death, the struggle for social justice, and the pursuit of physical and emotional well being continue to shape our lives today, proving the timeless nature of the human condition. The conveniences of modern life have undeniably altered the specifics of these experiences, but the underlying human drama unfolds with a remarkable consistency, reminding us that despite the passage of centuries, the human heart remains remarkably unchanged. The exploration of medieval sexuality serves as a poignant reminder of this enduring truth, providing valuable insights into the continuous story of humanity, a story whose core elements transcend the boundaries of time and culture. The past, therefore, is not a distant and irrelevant relic, but a living mirror reflecting the persistent and profound aspects of the human experience, illuminating the enduring and ever evolving narrative of human intimacy.